Yeah. Politics. You want to go to LDC, London Developer Conference? Hey, London Developer Conference is going to be a longer video because I'm going to try to capture everything that I've gone through in the day. Off camera is wifey.
Hello.
I'm going to try to explain some of this stuff to her through photos, which you'll see somewhere on the picture. It's probably there. I don't know. You'll see them there, and I just want to run through. It's going to be a lot because it is the whole day that I want to run through. So London Developer Conference, relatively young conference. It's part of the London Games Festival. It's very business oriented, as in game developers. I saw this lovely guy on a little building machine on the road. It was kind of funny to me on the way. Okay.
Especially how London-based we are.
I know, it's so adorable. So to start off with, the state of gaming. So this was from Chris String. This was the GI.biz talk. It was the state of the Games Industry Biz view on the market from Chris String. He gave lots of interesting data. There was actually way more slides than this. 2024 so far was the more interesting story for me. We saw the sort of COVID peak. Everyone was talking about that, and then all the relative layoffs. It was interesting to me how big the games on console segment was and how well that was actually doing in 2024. So yeah, the big thing that Chris had there, obviously, one of the interesting stats for me was going into COVID, we went from 40% old titles, 50% new titles, to 30% old titles, 60% new, and then we went up to 69% new, and then dropped back down to 63. But we're still in a place where new IPs are dominating, which is kind of interesting to me. Lots of new studios opening, lots of new investment. Everyone was kind of down on 2024 as a gaming year in terms of for the industry, but 2025 is looking really positive. Obviously, people talking about the Switch 2, people talking about the console hardware cycle reset. Very unsettled 12 months. A lot of people talking about sort of focus in the market and focus on games. Yeah, Chris's talk was full of juicy details. I'm giving you the very high level there, but it was mostly numbers, so it would be really dull for me just to go through all of his numbers again. Then we had Keza MacDonald, game editor of The Guardian, doing a fireside chat. This talk was interesting. It was really cool. She's definitely a Nintendo fan. She's writing a book on Nintendo at the moment. She was talking a lot about how more people are playing games than ever. She was talking about the diversity. Ironically, she thought that the kids market wasn't very well served at the moment, kids and teenagers weren't getting games made for them. She talked a lot about how defensive the industry is. A lot of people in the industry, like myself, who are older, we have a bit of a chip on our shoulders defending video games from yes, adults play video games. Yes, we make way more money than movies and music combined and TV combined. And we often talk so much about the money that we don't talk enough about the culture side of the industry. We overstate the industry's economic value in regards to its cultural value. This game is a very Guardian take to me. I think a lot of people care about the economic side, but I do agree, you don't want to constantly write at the start of every article, at the start of every bit of content, the games industry is worth such and such. You can kind of assume that, and I think the chip on the shoulder point is very valid. The other thing Keza self-identified is that her audience that she writes for at The Guardian is mostly tired grown-ups, which I think is reflective of The Guardian.
Mood.
Yeah. They talked a bit about the AIification of Google destroying SEO. This is, if you talk to anyone in sort of the games media space or anyone in SEO, this is a big deal at the moment. They talked a lot about feature pieces. It was really interesting because I was catching up with some older friends today, some of them who worked in magazines and stuff. And it used to be the case that video game press, you talked about the previews, games that were coming up, then you did the review for the game, and then you just stopped talking about the game because once the game was out, who gives a shit anymore? Whereas now we're seeing a lot of more journalism written a year, 2 years after the games come out, retrospectives and stuff, which is more in line with sort of keeping with media generally, sort of long tail coverage. So yeah, I found that really interesting. It was a good sort of a recap of everything there. Ooh, this deck was juicy. Now this is a rerun of her GDC deck, so if you saw it at GDC, then you are familiar with everything I'm going to say now. PC and console came in 2024. This is from the Newzoo data report that was released in, I think, March. Cool stuff in here. One of the things that really jumped out to me with the global games market is they're very bullish on console into 2026. Like they think console is going to be the primary growth driver. So that was really interesting to me, how much they thought console was going to drive. The other thing that was super interesting to me, look at the games market by region, is in the UK we make 5.5 billion from the games market, and 2.9 of that, so over half, is console gaming. PC gaming being 1.1 billion, which is just a little bit behind mobile at 1.5. I find that really interesting because it kind of sits with my worldview. You know, everyone always talks about how big mobile is, but I don't think mobile's as big in the UK. I think, you know, UK gamers have a different lineage, which kind of lines up with stuff. So that's interesting. Overall, playtime's down. Shocker, you know, like, of course playtime's down. We don't have lockdown anymore. And I think everyone's just a bit overworked and a bit tired.
Yeah, and people are having to go back into the office, which leaves less time for gaming during the day.
Lots of hype for Switch 2, lots of hype for this console refresh cycle. Yeah, global players by regions, talking about market breakdowns there. Average hours per quarter, so this was the playtime decrease. Obviously this is coming off lockdowns and stuff, but even looking at the last year of data, we're seeing a trend down. Very, very small trend down, but we're seeing a trend down. This is the stat that absolutely blew my mind, is when she started breaking down how that playtime is spent. So I think it's no shocker to anyone that we play more older games than we used to. But if you look at the slide there, the very light color is games that are less than 3 years old, then 3 to 5 years, and then 6+ years old. And games that are 6+ are dominating our playtime. And obviously playtime as a metric's really interesting because you can't do more than one thing at a time. There's only so many hours in a day. So what people are spending their time on matters almost more than what they're spending their money on. And so when you look at this, and this is where we start to get stats that are terrifying. So 25% of all playtime is 5 titles. So Fortnite, Roblox, League of Legends, Minecraft, Grand Theft Auto 5.
Damn.
Again, no surprises there. I knew those were that dominant. I didn't realize how many other games, you know, because that's still, you know, there's still a large segment of titles there that make up the other. But then here's the other thing. 60% of the playtime on new titles is franchise titles, right? So these are inaccessible markets, right? You're not, you know, every year these people are going to play whatever new version of this title is. So that those hours aren't available to you, which is, you know, it's kind of scary, which means that the entire games industry is fighting over 8% of playtime when you launch a game. When you launch a game, only 8% of players' time is addressable. And that blew my mind. Because now, for this 8%, right, you've got Diablo 4 fighting in there, you've got Hogwarts Legacy, Baldur's Gate, Elden Ring, Starfield. So not only are we talking about, like, you know, indie games and stuff, but we're talking about the entire addressable market, which I thought was kind of terrifying.
And imagine how many people you heard talk about playing Baldur's Gate in the last year or so. It felt like everyone was playing it. The
market's huge, right?
Yeah.
But then the other thing that was talked about here is, I think it's in one of these slides that's coming up. So yeah, premium transaction stuff. This was less interesting to me. The barriers. So she was basically saying players, if they buy your game on one platform, are very likely to buy your game on other platforms. So it's worth sort of spreading your game around multiple platforms. So this is the big thing, right? When you look at the breakout titles, they tend to have this big spike, this FOMO moment of no one, you know, everyone wants to like get on board on the Baldur's Gate train, the BattleBit train, Pearl World, Lethal Company. This is like what's hot at the moment. People jump on those, and then the player numbers drop off quite quickly. Or the playtime drops off quite quickly. But here's the cool part that I found interesting about that 8%. That 8% has a huge overlap. So she talks about this cohort of players that are ready to jump to the next thing. And me and my friend were basically saying, this is just streamers. This is content creators. And this is also why they're quite price point sensitive and frugal, because they have to purchase so much content. You know, there's so many people on YouTube and Twitch and everything who are making content around the new hot thing. And, you know, these taste makers, these trend chasers are driving a large amount of that 8%, which is interesting when you talk about marketing and how things go in. Though the other thing that was interesting, if you watch our other video, Tentacle Quill, I was thinking about, while this whole talk was going on, we have only reviewed one book that's come out in the last year.
Pretty much, yeah.
Because, I mean, you know, it makes sense, right? You talk about, you don't care when a book was released necessarily. No. And it's kind of becoming like that with video games.
I've personally noticed that I am very much lagging behind the wave with books. I will be reading books that are consistently 4 or 5 years after they've been published, and I need to start getting ahead of that.
Well, do you though? Yeah. I mean, maybe you do because like we care about books and we talk about books and we write books, but you know, and again, I think if you're in the video games industry, you've got kind of a duty to sort of keep up with trends to some extent, so for similar reasons. But as someone who reads books or just enjoys books, or as someone who plays video games, I don't know if you need to keep up. Like, I don't know why consumers have to buy the new thing.
I find, though, with the stuff that we've been reviewing, there is the initial interest when it's released, which is like a small impact, and then when it gets adapted, made into a movie, or
I think with books, that's a big thing. Like serialization drives book sales, I think, more than the initial release. And I think it's a similar thing with video games, is that when a video game gets its like year 3 patch, or it gets its like last bit of DLC, or it's been out for a while, the game's bug free, the game's polished,
streamers have played it for you,
you know. Now I can kind of see, but this probably was the talk I took that shook me the most, because I'm not talking yet about the game I'm working on, but this really surprised me that, you know, 66 titles, just 66 have 80% of all play time. And when you're releasing a new game in a year, you're fighting for 8%. That's such a small segment. Anyway, if you want the full the full report, it's available, the QR code that I put on screen. So that was really, really useful. This one is very businessy talk. I'm aware of video game tax credits. They're now being renamed to video game expenditure credits. I've got to do a lot of accounting for this. Ew. Thankfully, we're not spending a ton of money yet on the game, but as this gets up, I'm going to have to do this stuff. So a lot of places have this. It's a kind of fund. If you're in the UK, you need to apply for it. Basically, you need to pass a Britishness test, but it's quite easy to pass that test, assuming you're based in the UK. So what is it? So the old fund was 25% of your core expenditure, capped at 80%. So that means 80% of what you spend, you can claim 25% back on, but only on core expenditure, so actual development of the game. So you can't claim it on marketing and things like that. But then the VGEC, which is coming in, which is slightly different, is going to be 25.5% capped at 80% of core expenditure. So that's going to be a nice little 0.5% bump. The old program is going to be sunsetted in 2027. The one thing to note is the old program allowed you to do any core expenditure in the EU. The new program is UK only. It's all to do with Brexit. But you can still apply under the old program, assuming your game starts development before April 1st next year, so before the next financial year, and the program runs until 2027. So also the company has to be set up prior to the game's development, and the game has to stay with the same company throughout development. There's a bunch of qualifications and stuff. I'm probably not the best person to talk about it here. I do some funding stuff with the EU and whatnot, so I've dealt with all this stuff before. This was a really good talk. It's mostly about helping you through the process, because the thing is, these people who give you money, they want to give you money. You know, that's kind of their job, government grants. And there's no, is your game good enough? It's basically, as long as you can tick the check boxes of, you know, as long as you're legally compliant with everything, you get it. You just get it. So we need to make sure that we do all that stuff and make sure we get that money. But yeah, very, very useful thing there. This talk, oh man, this talk was heavy. So the next talk was the Friendship Machine. This is EVE Online's CEO, Hilmar Pétursson, I'm going to say. That's an Icelandic name. This talk, there's so much in this talk to break down. I don't know if I can do a good job of breaking this talk down. The key thing about this talk, first of all, EVE's huge. If you're not aware of EVE, it's massive. It has tons and tons of players, and they also, it's not just the EVE game, it's all of their sub-games as well, and they're expanding a bunch of these out. There's a lot of things that they're doing with this franchise and this IP, and it's all interconnected. There was a great slide here from when they started development, which was 20 years ago, and today, because time flies, right? But the fact that his daughter grew up that much into an adult in that time is like a really meaningful metric to him of time passing, which makes sense, right? Whereas this is a much less meaningful metric of like, these are the patches that have been released. He had a little side remark about how hard it is to develop games remotely into lockdown. Also just talking about like quality improvements. Oh, this one, so this was actually him talking about, so the Friend Machine, he talked a bit about how the journalism coverage around the heist saved EVE. This particular slide is referencing when everyone shot a statue. If you're interested in the history of EVE, he actually referenced the Down the Rabbit Hole video. It's like a 6-hour video here on YouTube. I'll link it. It's amazing. But like, this talk was heavy because he was talking about there's been enough playtime in EVE that if these people had spent that time building a pyramid, there would be 5 Great Pyramids of Gazas built, which is, it's a lot of time. Now, one could argue that an hour of back-breaking labor in the sun carrying heavy stone is not equivalent to sitting at your desk, you know, clicking on your mouse. But it's still a lot of time, and they're thinking about it a lot, which I thought was interesting. So but the whole point of this talk, I don't think I actually got a screenshot. Here we go, rules for happiness. This slide hits so hard. First of all, fuck Immanuel Kant. I think I've said this before. I studied philosophy, and Kant's inherent truths. I'm getting sidetracked. However, this is a good quote. Okay, it's a good quote. It's a cute quote. I find Kant as a philosopher can go get fucked. I can't quote Kant without giving that caveat, because I don't want anyone to think I largely subscribe to him. But I do agree with this quote. The rules for happiness: something to do, someone to love, something to hope for. You know, you've got to find meaning in your work. You've got to have someone to share your accomplishments with. And you've got to have something to look forward to. Okay, maybe I'm at 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
I want to get it up to 3 out of 3. Anyway.
Okay,
Yeah, she gets me. She gets me. You know which one is solid. Well, one of these is without question.
The cats do love you a lot.
don't think they count. You suicidal little bastard. But yeah, so real life needs improvement. So one of the big things he went on is there's a lot of people, there's billions of people in the world, but self-reported from surveys, it's estimated only 200 million people actually like their day job, like what they're spending their time on. Which is scary, right?
It is.
It's terrifying, but it's, you know, I understand it, right? Like, living is hard.
It is.
You know, thriving under capitalism.
Fuck it.
Happiness in this economy? you know, it's tough, right? I feel very privileged. You know, the other thing he talked about, I don't know if I got a slide for it, is yeah, I did. Here we go. The loneliness is becoming an epidemic, right? That's that second one of someone to love. Self-reported, New Yorkers went down from having 7 friends on average in, I think it was 2016, 2014, he said, down to 2. Yeah, I think it's a similar trend in London. You know,
yeah, that makes sense.
Loneliness is an epidemic, and like COVID did not help.
No.
And then, you know, like on the something, so before I keep talking about the loneliness epidemic, because it goes a bit deeper on that, the last one, the better future, something to hope for. You know, I don't want to go into politics or anything too much, but like people, you know, I personally think the future's bright. I don't think the immediate future is not going to be without hardship, but I'm positive about the future. But I think, you know, with everything that goes on in the world, a lot of people are, understandably. So that's a tough one. That's a really tough one. So anyway, the one he focused on, because obviously we talked, the title of the talk was The Friendship Machine, is how EVE Online makes friends. And this slide I laughed at so much, because this slide is from the CIA, or rather this formula is from the CIA, because hey, most of espionage is getting money out of people, getting information out of people who think they're your friends. So friendship is equal to proximity, frequency, duration, and intensity. So proximity, how local are you to a person, how likely are you to bump into them, duration, how much time do you spend on with them, how frequently do you bump into them or see them, and intensity. Now intensity is a big one, apparently more than the others, which is obviously if you bump into someone at the coffee shop every day, it's quite hard to build a meaningful friendship. But if you get dropped into a jungle and have to survive for a week, the intensity of that experience forms a pretty deep and meaningful bond. And it's the one that the CIA apparently exploits the most, is the intensity one. But yeah, there is a formula for friendship. And video game developers can actually play with that formula, which is interesting to me. The other interesting thing was basically a key point for EVE player acquisition and retention is devastating loss. So this is that emotional intensity, because EVE is a murder hellscape, as he kept saying, and at some point you're going to lose your very expensive spaceship, and the loss is meaningful, right? Because in EVE the shit matters, and how you deal with the loss is whether or not you stay in the community. And this is that moment of intensity. And it goes in now into motivations for why people play the game, and people who help others have the highest engagement in the game, which I found extremely interesting mechanically and just so from a social aspect. So having the mechanics in there to help others and build relationships. Talked a lot about skills people acquired in the game. I've seen a lot of this talk about EVE before and about video games generally, so this wasn't as interesting to me. Talked about like EVE is bigger than the game. This was fascinating, small little side story. So he talked about like ownership being 9/10 the law, and if I have this cup of coffee in my hand, it must belong to me. If I have this cat in my lap, it must belong to me. Prove otherwise. You can't.
I'll get the treats out.
But the thing is that Hammurabi, thank you. It's not a gorilla in a zoo that changed history. It's just some old dude with tablets. Anyway, Hammurabi, the Code of Hammurabi, is the earliest record of ownership. And he basically had a giant fuck-off army, but then he also had these clay tablets that tracked ownership of junk. And he had a bunch of rules on how ownership worked, these 282 rules. And if you fucked with his rules, he sent his army out and he fucked you up, right? It was enforced by army. And the reality is, this is how economics works today. you know? Like, the joke is between, what's the difference between a dialect and a language, right?
The Navy.
A Navy, because it's like, you know, when we print the pound or when the US prints the dollar, the real guarantee of it is we fuck you up if you don't honor it. It's enforced by force. That is a fiat currency, right? That is how that works. Then he went into this whole pitch about their open source thing and how they're basically, I don't want to say NFTs because they're not doing NFTs, but they're trying to come up with a new system of how to distribute ownership. And I think they've been thinking about this a lot. To be fair, they have been in the metaverse space since the 90s. They're probably, I think the thing I said to my friend, it's probably going to fuck up. They're probably the best people to fuck it up. Because it's a very hard thing they're trying to do. And they know it's a hard thing. They're not naive. They're very, very aware of how hard it is. It was honestly such a good talk. Such a good talk. I personally, as a game developer, didn't take much away from the talk for the thing I'm building. As a person, it reinforced things I already knew. And I found the talk very interesting. Right. Last talk before lunch. Plain politics panel. This was fascinating. So this is George Osborn, Matt Honeycombe-Foster, and Don Murphy talking about UK politics and how it's going to impact the games industry. Because, you know, everyone likes to ignore politics, but politics is the fabric on which we build businesses. And that's how this plays in, right? Things like the video game fund, whether or not it's going to happen. So this was a very important talk. It was a very interesting talk. I've got notes because they didn't have slides. So one of the big deals is, and this mirrors what Keza's talk was about, people are aging into power who grew up playing video games now. So your average MP plays video games. There was actually a bunch of joking about the Tory Call of Duty WhatsApp group. Apparently, there's like a Tory Call of Duty WhatsApp group for like in the Houses of Parliament or whatever.
Call of Snooty.
I know, right? It's fucking hilarious. So talking to them about this stuff's a lot easier. So, yeah, they're talking about a lot of tech regulation stuff. Apparently, we're very good at starting businesses in the UK, very good at starting new games companies. We're bad at scaling them. UK games companies tend to get acquired by global companies, which is not good for the UK. Like, it's partly good for the UK, but it's better if those companies are able to scale as part of the UK economy. So that's a big deal. The Online Safety Act coming into force. So the Online Safety Act started out as the Harm Reduction Act under Theresa May, but it's enforced now. It's mostly aimed at social media companies, but because video game companies have online communities and things like that, some of the stuff in there is really relevant to us. The Digital Markets Act has been finalized, but it is not yet enforced. Again, this is aimed mostly at subscriptions and antitrust things, but it's going to hit games again, because if you do subscriptions, you've got to pay attention to it, and there's some other bits in there. One of the biggest things is going to hit like mobile app stores, Apple and Google and things like that. And so that's going to hit a lot of things. Do you know, I'm really interested to see if this hits Amazon with digital books and Audible.
That would
I'd be
really
interested to see if that hits. And then the UK doesn't currently have an AI policy. We've elected not to follow the EU's AI policy. The EU Act is the first global act that's actually been knocked out and put into thing. Though the EU June election is a big deal. That has actually a huge effect, arguably more of an effect on the UK games industry than the UK election, because EU policy really does affect us. It's a huge market. But also we expect UK AI policy to be drafted in the near future. On that, I did actually have a question to them, because I'd heard rumors about permissive policy environment for AI similar to the genetics policy of New Labour from the 90s. There was no hard info there. Apparently there's been, and I read up on this, in February there was really hard pushback from the IPO. That's the Copyright Enforcement, the Intellectual Property Office. They do copyright enforcement in the UK. So apparently if we do have UK AI policy, it'll be a bit more balanced in regards to copyright. But I'm keeping an ear out for that, because obviously we don't have... And AI is almost certainly going to come up in both parties' manifestos in the election, which is really interesting. Apparently Rishi Sunak's an avid gamer, but apparently Keir Starmer's favourite game is Lego Star Wars. It's a good game, but it's kind of a lowball answer. He is an older politician. No one wanted to talk about the US. Apparently it was described as an angry bag of snakes that we shall not touch. So, yeah, lots of talk about budgets. So, for example, something that will affect the UK games industry is visas, right? Apparently it's quite hard to get skilled talent in. And a big bit of advice was hit up your local MP, because if you're any kind of business of any significance, your MP will pay attention to you. And a lot of game companies are pretty big, you know, and have quite a lot of clout. So they should be wielding it with their local MP. You know, do a studio visit, do those kind of things. There was a lot of mentioning that we don't expect to see much new policy before the snap election. It's kind of a week-to-week battle in Westminster at the moment, very tactical. But the civil servants, unlikely to change, mostly going to stay around. So that was really interesting. We went off to lunch. Came back to, frankly, I'm just going to say it was just a marketing talk from Roblox. Did I get any interesting slides from that talk? Vertex, that's just pictures of you. There we go, interesting slides from that talk. Classical flywheel, a lot of stuff about the Creators Fund. It's kind of interesting. The Creators Fund's basically like a third-party publishing arm inside of Roblox. Starts at $500,000 for budget, whereas the other side of the business, which is the developer exchange program, is more like a YouTube Twitch payment model. Surprise, surprise, 28 million is taken by the top 10 creators on average. The top 1,000 creators take 100K on average. So it's very much a quick, fast drop-off, what we see in other marketplaces as well. So next up, this was great. This was absolutely great. I felt so embarrassed because I actually ran into Tommy at lunch and he had AI and games on his badge. And I just blanked totally that it was the AI in Games YouTube channel that I've watched for years and I'm aware of, but I blanked. But I had a nice conversation with him over lunch. It was really good. It was really, really good. Honestly, his talk was a breath of fresh air. He's a very energetic speaker and I got so much out of it. So this is his background. Like, he's been doing AI for a fucking long time and he's not one of these fly-by-night people, was his key point. He has a lot of knowledge on AI in the space and he's qualified to talk about this shit and you should listen to him. His big point was Game AI, you know, like, which starts with like NIM in 1951. I didn't get a picture of that slide, unfortunately. And Speed Race in 1974 was basically an AI opponent in a video game. And then went through first-person shooters, so like Doom and Half-Life and Fear and stuff. These are all games where you kill your AI. You run around. And most of this is AI opponents, pathing and logic and, how to be a good opponent. But then we go into ML and he talks a bit about AI as opponent in StarCraft, the AlphaGo kind of stuff that happened off there. Slide for sort of breaking down different kinds of AI. But his key point was everyone really, when we're talking about AI at the moment, is talking generative AI in the video games industry. They're basically, everyone's talking about GPT and Midjourney. They're not talking about, I don't think I got a picture. No, I didn't get a picture of it. But there's a great slide of like the Venn diagram of AI and how like AI as a concept's huge, video game AI is there, ML is here, and then inside ML there's generative AI. But generative AI is the thing that everyone's basically talking about at the moment. He talks about stability AI, running out of cash to pay for their servers, and how these models are expensive to run. These models are very, very expensive to run, and not everyone has a business model. He was predicting in the next 6 to 12 months to see a lot of these companies sort of going under. He also mentioned a lot about the Steam legal situation. Basically, Steam, you have to fill out a bunch of forms. They're quite strict on their AI policies. his in summary stuff. Yeah, AI games is far more than bad guys in generative AI. You know, there's lots of stuff. There's procedural generation. There's all kinds of bits. Lots of tooling. Like, you know, he made the joke, and I laughed so hard because I've heard this so much in my day job about the AI people want is like good UV unwrapping. And it's like little things like, I laugh so hard. Why the fuck is generative AI generating a PNG? It's fucking useless. Why aren't they generating Photoshop files with layers and useful stuff? I found that so good. Generally the mood, because he acknowledged that like every single studio that he talks to has their own internal models. He talked about Ubisoft showing off their model at GDC. But everyone's cautious because of quality, trust, blowback, and ethics. So quality, obviously, it's very hard to deliver AAA quality at the moment. A lot of the models aren't there. It's very hard to establish trust because these companies are young. They're often service. They don't have enterprise agreements. You know, is the thing I'm building my game on going to exist in a year? You know, the point of paying servers and all that kind of stuff. Is it going to be as good, or are they going to, because this happened with GPT where they scaled back the processing power given to a response. And so GPT got noticeably worse. So it's interesting. The consumer blowback and the ethical blowback, you know, you got to be careful of it. And then the ethics, right? The legal and ethical situation of, because, you know, when I make a commercial product and I publish it, I have to take responsibility for the thing I publish. And if I make a video game and it uses AI and the AI has a bunch of legal challenges because it's stolen a bunch of art and stuff like that, that's a huge freaking problem, right? Microsoft, actually, when you use Copilot, for example, has a legal defense fund, which if you get sued for using Microsoft Copilot, they will help defend you. We also talked about the thing of LLM free, so some AI companies and some tech companies basically advertising themselves as 100% large language model free to sort of identify that is not part of their business. Okay, cool, there's a QR code. Okay, QR code for the slides. Oh, so much good stuff here that I didn't take as many notes because I was so interested in what they were saying. And I'm getting tired at this point because it's later in the day. The short version of this AI talk. So first of all, it was really interesting to me. Yukun's son, she's got her game at Now Play This, so I'm looking forward to seeing it. It's an actual indie game that it's an AI native game, as she described it. Interesting, everyone on the panel prior was so negative about AI on Steam, but then she was like, oh, actually, as long as you disclose everything and you fill out all the forms correctly, it's not actually a problem to publish that. But I also saw her face kind of drop at one point in the talk when Tommy mentioned that Steam is apparently looking into the ability to report content that's generated from AI, like community reporting and vote brigading. We all just know the problems there. Simon was largely pushing an Unreal Engine toolkit they're building, which was really interesting. This was interesting. Florence Smith Nicholas. So she is an archaeologist who looks at procedural generation. I love procedural generation. I've done talks on it and everything. I love it to bits. But what was interesting to her was players behaving like archaeologists for procedural generated content. So like you have this randomly thrown together environment, but then you can infer story from this procedural environment, behaving like an archaeologist. It was really good. And Matthew, hardcore game AI person, he was very, very like, how do I say this? Came across like he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder because prior to all this AI hype, it was very easy for him to explain what his company did, like his services his company offered, because it's like game AI services and tooling services and whatnot. You know, belts and braces technology. Whereas obviously now everyone's like, what do you do GPT for games? So he had a bit of a thing there that was kind of interesting. Fascinating talk, panel. Hey, sorry, camera overheated. I was using this little guy, he overheated. Oh, great. So the Solve Discoverability talk. This talk was overall kind of the basics. It was a good talk. So, appeal to your audience. Don't bother unless you have a good game. It's an old adage, but it needs to be said. I think a lot of people are like, how do I get my game discovered? Is it good? Store page. Whatever store you're on, but there was a lot of talk about Steam. You've just got to pay a lot of attention to that, right? Because if you're driving traffic to your store page and your store page isn't good, then all that money you're spending on driving traffic to it just sucks. Spread your spend. There was a lot of wishy-washiness around this, where it's like, you don't know what's going to work, so you need to spread your money around. Fair enough. Know your product. That was really something that people circled back to a lot. Where and when to convert, right? There was a great line where someone was talking about, I'm on TikTok to be entertained, not because I'm shopping for a video game. So if you're putting content on TikTok, it needs to be entertaining. Don't try sell me the video game. Try to entertain me, and then I'll maybe, so, and also like, someone who had seen a streamer play your game is probably not going to stop the stream that very second and go to the store and buy the game necessarily. But when they see your game later advertised and they're in the mindset, that stream they watched might be the difference between whether or not they click through and convert on the purchase. So a lot of it was like building awareness, basic stuff. Store page, number one thing to look out for. Then look at testing, basically spend money, test it to see how it works. So number one, get your store page in order, spend money, test what works, what doesn't work. When you find something that works, double down on that spend, because it's going to be different for your game than it is going to be for other games. Very much marketing 101 stuff, but it's always good to hear. Yeah, and that was that. Colin MacDonald's Games Job Live. Now, he started this during COVID because he couldn't run his Scottish Games Recruiter Fair thing. So it's since expanded out. Oh boy, did this talk hit. Juniors, I'm so sorry, you're fucked. I don't know how else to say that. So there are job vacancies. You can sort of see London is always a powerhouse. You can see the typical hubs like Guildford and Leamington Spa and all those kind of places show up on the map. We definitely have like clusters of games companies. Also, interesting thing, London tends to lead the pack. So London hires before other parts of the country hire, but we also tend to fire before other parts of the country fire. So London's a good thermos for the country. Across disciplines, so obviously code, everyone's always hiring for code, everyone always needs code. It's not necessarily because there's more coders in a studio, by the way, this is just often because it's harder to fill those positions. You sort of see through the thing. I sent this picture to my wife because there's one writing position open out of all of those. Holy fuck, being a games writer at heart, it's kind of a thing. A historical spread, sort of just seeing where the thing, as I say, code is generally always needed. But then there was an interesting pickup with design uptick recently. I think that's a sign, by the way, that more games are early in production. Fucked. So there's very few jobs available historically in the junior role. Now, I think a lot of this is because a lot of studios have relationships with universities, so they do have an intake of juniors that come directly from universities, and so there's very little advertising of those jobs. And they do have apprenticeship programs and things like that, like coming in. But like, if you are just looking for a job and you are not onboarding through some kind of program, it kind of sucks. There was one slide which I didn't capture, unfortunately, where there was one open position. I think it was one open position in London at the moment for a junior. There was one position somewhere else in the country that was remote, and then there was one position in Guildford. No, there was two in London, one remote, and one in Guildford. And Guildford's commuting distance from London. So For the whole area of London and Guildford, massive hubs, there were 4 roles, assuming the remote one as well in there, for a junior to apply to. So if I am out of the games industry and studio, or if I've been laid off recently as a junior, or I am someone with like a year or 2 of games experience, fucking hell, it's just harsh. It's just harsh. That talk hit hard. It was really, honestly, a banger of a day. It was great to see friends, but it was also just a really solid event. I would happily go to that again next year. I love a good one-track conference. Everyone goes into the same room, you'll see the same talk, you're all on the same page. Because the conference only has 1 track to fill, they generally fill it with good speakers because they're not trying to pad out a program. Yeah, I'm a big fan of one-track conferences. LDC, solid value, really solid speakers, just packed with info. And yeah, London Games Festival is great. I'm going to head off to Now Play This tomorrow, catch up with that stuff. I may share some of that. Got Ludum Dare this weekend. Looking forward to that, doing Ludum Dare this weekend as sort of a blow off steam. Because I'm in a weird place with the video game project I'm working on at the moment. More on that another time. I don't think I'm at the stage yet where I want to talk about the thing I'm working on. But yeah, that was everything there. I'll be at WASD. For those of you who are doing the BAFTAs tonight, probably the BAFTAs will be finished by the time this is posted and edited, because I'll try to get it up tonight. I hope good stuff wins. I'm sure good stuff wins. BAFTAs is always great. I'm completely shattered. I'm going to edit this now and try and get it up for you tonight. So if you see this tonight, well, you'll probably, because even if I edit it tonight, you'll probably be seeing this tomorrow morning. Yeah, hope it's useful to you in some capacity. Toodaloos. Let me stop recording now.